Hi, sixth grade. Thank you for those of you who turned in your hip hop rap poem things last week. No one performed them, but I really enjoyed the ones I did read, and I wish we could have done this in class where we could have actually let you guys perform. But anyway, so this week we're going to kick it old school and we're going to learn about Peter Tchaikovsky. So, your assignment's going to be a two-part. So part one of your assignment is I'm going to give you two Peter Tchaikovsky songs to listen to, and you're going to tell me which one is your favorite and why. And then you have a second part, okay? All right. So Peter Tchaikovsky was born in a Russian town called Voskresensk in 1840. He used his imagination to create beautiful music, and it was sometimes happy and sometimes sad, which, I mean, I feel like that's normal. Like, a well-balanced person has sad times and happy times, right? Peter wrote his music during a time that was called the Romantic period. The music by romantic composers wasn't necessarily about falling in love. It just was about their own dream world and their deepest feelings. When you listen to Peter Tchaikovsky's music, you can often tell how he felt when he was writing it. So this is like about him doing a song. It's like, oh my gosh, it should have been it was so sad. What happened to you? And he's like, nah, I just didn't have any ice cream money. Oh, actually, my ice cream fell out of my cone after I bought it. That would have been a great hip-hop song, guys. Come on. Romantic composers sometimes wrote their music to go along with a well-known story or poem. So Tchaikovsky had three ballets, Swan Lake, Sleeping Beauty, and The Nutcracker that all came from famous stories. Peter Tchaikovsky first became interested in music when he was about 4 or 5. His father brought home an orchestrion, which is a machine that plays music. It looked like a giant music box with lots of additional parts, and it sounded more like a real orchestra. One of the pieces the orchestrion played was a tune by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. He was a famous Austrian composer who had lived during the 1700s before Peter was born. So here's, like, I don't know how that looked, but, like, that's how I imagine it. So, you know, and this says, and so Mr. Tchaikovsky, I'm sure you would agree, this model will look great in your living room. And he's like, this thing is bigger than my living room. And Peter's like, can we get it, Dad? Aw. Peter loved Mozart's music. He tried to copy the pieces he heard on his family's orchestrion on his family's piano. While Peter was growing up, he was very sensitive. Things that wouldn't bother other children seemed to be the worst thing ever for Peter. This sounds like my son. Being super sensitive was always a problem for Peter, but it was also one of the reasons he was able to write such beautiful music. He had feelings about things that most people didn't. He was able to put those feelings into music. And this says, I'm sorry, Peter. I didn't mean you forgot to button the top button of your shirt. I meant someone else did. He's like, it was my fault. Please forgive me. I'll try harder next time. Yes, this sounds like my son. So he was upset because his plate was the wrong color green today. Like, it has to be green most of the time, which is fine. Or he'll get upset because the avocados aren't ready to eat yet. Or you'll tell him, no, ma'am, we can't go outside because it's raining, and he'll just, and it's super great. It's super great. As a young man, Peter Tchaikovsky didn't start out to be a serious composer. Most people don't. Even though he wrote some pieces and played the piano and flute well, music was like a hobby to him. At the time when he was growing up, hardly anyone in Russia made a living writing music. In fact, his parents had planned for him to become a lawyer. When he was 10, his parents decided he should begin learning about law, and they sent him to a few different schools in St. Petersburg, the city they lived. When he was 21, he graduated from law school and took a job in a government office. During his time, when it came to serious classical music, people in Russia were satisfied to listen to the music of Italy, France, Austria, Germany, and other parts of Europe. One of the things about music in Russia, too, though, is there's this thing called censorship where the government basically kind of edits and dictates what kind of music can be released, and that makes it really hard to be creative when you have to follow a certain set of guidelines. Oh, sorry. Picture of St. Petersburg in 1803. Fortunately for Peter, things were starting to change in Russia. There was a group of people in St. Petersburg who thought it was about time that Russia had its own music, written by Russian composers. Soon after he started his job, a new music school opened up in St. Petersburg. And since music was all he could practically think about, and since he didn't really like being a lawyer that much, he decided it was a good time to quit and start studying music seriously. So here he is, leaving his law place, and he's like, bye everyone. Everyone's like, thank goodness. One of his teachers at the school was the famous musician named Anton Rubinstein. Anton knew Peter would become a great composer someday, and he worked hard with him to develop his talents. Later, when Anton's equally famous brother Nikolai started a new music school in Moscow, Peter was invited to join him as a teacher. So here's Anton. And he's like, oh my gosh, your music is awful. It's complicated. It's terrible. It's miserable. It's too loud. It sounds like everyone else's and it's yuck. And Peter's like, man, I hope his brother's nicer. So then he goes to work with his brother and he's like, your music is terrible and complicated. It's miserable. It's too loud. It sounds like everyone else's. It's yuck. Seems to run in the family. So he learned about music from Nikolai when he moved over. Both Anton and Nikolai were very tough on Peter, and they often criticized his music to make sure that Peter was doing his very best. Although Peter didn't like to be criticized, he learned a lot from the brothers and ended up becoming friends with him. This is like super common with music teachers through history, is like they're really hard on them. They're like some of the greatest composers had really stern music teachers who really taught them like how to become their best self and not just settle. It wasn't long before Peter Tchaikovsky started to do very well with his music, and once he was asked to conduct one of his pieces for an audience. Peter was nervous and he imagined his head might fall off, and he held tightly to his beard the entire performance. It took 10 years before Peter felt like he could conduct in front of an audience again. And here's a guy, he's like, okay, if my head falls off, I want you to catch it. Peter was always getting upset about things that were completely imaginary. This is called anxiety. I have it, and you will get upset about stuff. Just imagining stuff could happen. Like, what if this happened? And it makes you upset about it, even though it didn't happen. Peter worked so hard on his music that sometimes he made himself sick. When he was writing his first symphony, he worked night and day until he wore himself out to get it just the way he wanted. He named his first symphony Winter Dreams, and when you listen to it, you can almost see wintry fields and imagine the feeling of riding a horse-drawn sleigh over the Russian countryside when it was snowy, and this was something Peter loved. Winter Dreams, also called Symphony No. 1 in G minor, is a good example of how Peter Tchaikovsky was able to put his music to what he felt or dreamed about. There you go. This guy's really pretty in that picture. Peter also included melodies from Russian folk songs in his symphony. He had enjoyed listening to the folk songs when he was a kid. He listened carefully when he heard people working, whistling outside his window, or children singing and playing in the streets. He wrote down these folk tunes and used them in his later symphonies, operas, and ballets. Many romantic composers got musical ideas from folk songs and peasant dances. These were composers like Franz Liszt, Frédéric Chopin, Edvard Grieg, and Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov. All used folk music to add excitement to their music and show how proud they were of their country and their history. Bela Bartok did this too. He wasn't from Russia, but he actually has like Slavic dance numbers. By the time Peter was 37, he had written 3 operas, 3 symphonies, a ballet, and lots of other pieces of music. Sometimes his music was liked, but many times people didn't like it. Peter was upset by this, as well as the fact he wasn't making very much money. Just when he was starting to worry about his future, something amazing happened. A rich widow who loved his music decided to help him out. Madame Nadezhda von Meck wanted Peter to be able to work on his music without worrying about money or having to get another job. She agreed to give Peter money every year as long as they would never meet face to face. Peter went along with Madame's wishes, and as strange as it seems, they became best friends by writing each other letters for many years. In fact, he dedicated his famous Symphony No. 4 in F minor to Madame von Meck. So this is called a patron. So this was his patron, kind of like a sponsor, and here they are, like a little comic of her in like a curtain giving him money. Peter Tchaikovsky had always loved to travel. Now that he was making money, he felt better, and he was able to take trips all over Europe. He sometimes gave concerts in cities he visited, and his travel also gave him ideas for new music. Peter was very close with his family, especially his brother Modeste and his sister Sasha. Peter often traveled with Modeste. Do you want to know something like really cool? Sasha is actually a nickname for Alexandra. I always thought that was really cool because they're nothing alike. One trip to Paris, Peter heard a newly invented instrument called a celesta. It sounded like a piano, but it made beautiful bell-like sounds. So celesta is actually what's used in Hedwig's theme. The do-do-do-do-do. That's what that is. Peter thought it was the perfect instrument to add to his Nutcracker suite. So this was used in the dance of the Sugar Plum Fairies. Peter wanted to be the first composer to use the celesta and had one secretly smuggled out of Paris. You can hear its magical bell-like sound throughout the dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy. So here he is. He's like smuggling it under his coat, which is like hilarious. One of Peter Tchaikovsky's talents was discovering new instruments and using unusual new combinations of instruments to get beautiful and exciting sounds into his music. In one of his most famous pieces, the 1812 Overture, Peter even used church bells and real cannons to get the sound right. Yeah, he used real cannons. It was awesome. Okay, hold it, everyone. From now on, I think we better practice outside. Yeah, I would think so. Even though Peter Tchaikovsky became famous all over the world for his music, he was very unhappy most of the time. One of his biggest problems was he could never find the right person to fall in love with. Peter felt like he was missing out on one of the most important parts of his life, and he has beautifully expressed his trouble of feeling in his very last piece of music he composed called Symphony No. 6 in B minor, also known as Pathétique. It's very beautiful. He did seem to find happiness, though, composing music about love. Some of the most beautiful written pieces he heard that you hear in Tchaikovsky's Romeo and Juliet Overture and in his ballet Sleeping Beauty. Here's a little picture from the ballet Sleeping Beauty. Yes. Peter Tchaikovsky lived to be 53. Probably one of the most important things he gave to us was beautiful music with interesting melodies. A melody is the tune that is the part of the musical piece that's easiest to remember. It's usually the part that's most fun to hum or whistle. Two of his most loved pieces, Violin Concerto in D major and Piano Concerto No. 1 in B flat minor, are filled with beautiful melodies. It's pretty easy to find Tchaikovsky's music on public radio, TV, and during the holiday season, many ballet companies across the country put on performances of the Nutcracker. If you've never seen the Nutcracker performed by the Arizona Ballet with the Phoenix Symphony playing, it's really great. The tickets start off at $20 a piece, so it's a little expensive if you're taking like the whole family, but it's definitely like worth seeing. So, your assignment. So I told you originally that you were going to listen to two Tchaikovsky songs. That's actually, I'm changing that. There is about 6 songs mentioned in the book, and I'm going to list these 6 songs. You're going to listen to them and put them in order of your favorite and why. And then you have to tell me why the top one was your favorite and why the bottom one was your least favorite. Because you don't have to like them all. Like, I get it. Not all music is great. But I do want you to listen to them and put them in a ranking order, okay? All right, bye guys.